She looked him dead in the eye and asked, "Why is my mom's photo in your mansion?" The billionaire froze. That one question uncovered a 20-year-old secret, and a promise he had never kept until that night. "Why is my mom's photo in your mansion?" The girl's voice cracked like lightning through the grand marble hall. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, darted between the gilded picture frame on the wall and the billionaire standing frozen just a few feet away. The massive chandelier above them glimmered, scattering light across the gold-framed portraits of powerful people, historic awards, and moments of luxury. But among all that grandeur, this one photo looked different. It was simple, unpolished, a faded picture of a smiling young woman in a nurse's uniform, her hand resting gently on the shoulder of a much younger Richard Caldwell. The billionaire stared at the photograph, his usually cold blue eyes softening into confusion, and then into something else. Pain. That face. That smile. The same warmth he hadn't seen in decades. For a moment, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Richard's lips parted, his voice breaking the silence. Where did you see this woman?" The girl swallowed hard, her trembling fingers pointing toward the frame. "I didn't just see her," she whispered. "She's my mom, Grace Walker. But she died when I was 8. The entire mansion seemed to freeze in time. The butlers stopped mid-step. The maids exchanged silent glances. Even the ticking of the enormous grandfather clock in the corner seemed to hesitate. Richard's jaw tightened. A tremor of disbelief rippled through his body. "Grace Walker," he said slowly, as if speaking the name summoned ghosts. "That's not possible." The girl, no older than 19, clenched her fists, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Why is her photo here? Who are you to her?" Her name was Talia Walker. She wasn't from this world of marble floors and chandeliers. Her shoes were worn. Her white blouse was neatly ironed but faded, and her brown eyes, though tired, burned with something fierce. Truth. Richard took a hesitant step forward. "You're saying she was your mother?" "Yes," Talia snapped, her tone rising with emotion. "And I want to know what she was doing in your house. Because last time I checked, my mom worked 3 jobs just to feed me. She never talked about any billionaire." Her words struck like arrows, sharp and full of hurt. Richard looked down, rubbing the edge of his ring finger, a habit he'd picked up years ago when trying to calm his nerves. "Grace," he murmured again, barely audible. "I haven't heard that name in 20 years." He turned toward the photo, his reflection ghosted over hers. She saved me." Talia blinked, confused. "Saved you." He took a deep breath, exhaling like a man who had carried a secret far too long. "I don't know what your mother told you, but when I met her, I was a broken man. She worked at St. Mary's Hospital. I was a patient there after an accident that nearly killed me. Everyone around me was focused on my money, my name, but your mother," his voice trembled. "She treated me like a human being." Talia's expression softened, but only slightly. "My mom worked at St. Mary's? She did talk about a patient once. Someone, she said, reminded her that even rich people can be lonely." Her lip quivered. "She said he was kind, that he made her laugh." Richard let out a faint chuckle, the sound of nostalgia mixed with regret. "That was me." He stepped closer, his eyes distant, remembering. "Your mother used to bring me soup every evening. Not hospital food, real soup. She said hospital meals tasted like cardboard." He smiled sadly. "She told me about you. Said her daughter loved to draw, that she had big dreams." Talia's breath caught in her throat. "My mom talked about me? To you?" He nodded slowly. "Every day. She'd say, 'My little Talia's gonna make the world proud someday.' She'd describe your drawings, your laughter. She kept a photo of you in her locket. Said it reminded her why she worked so hard." Talia covered her mouth, tears starting to form. "That locket. I still have it. It's all I have left of her." A heavy silence filled the space between them, a silence that carried years of pain, secrets, and missed moments. Then Richard's tone changed, lower, almost trembling. "Talia, there's something you should know. Your mother didn't just work for the hospital. She saved my life. And not just medically. After my accident, I was ready to give up. My company was collapsing. My wife had left me, and my son wouldn't even speak to me. I had nothing left. He turned toward her, eyes glistening. And then your mother walked into my room. She looked at me and said, "Money can rebuild your company, but only kindness can rebuild you." He laughed under his breath, shaking his head. I thought she was crazy. But every day, she'd check on me, tell me stories, make me smile. I hadn't smiled in years. Talia stood still, tears streaming freely now. That sounds like her. Richard nodded. When I finally recovered, I tried to thank her. I offered her money, a house, anything she wanted. But she refused. She said, "Mr. Caldwell, kindness isn't a transaction. Just pass it on someday." And then, one day, she was gone. No goodbye. Just gone. He swallowed hard, emotion cracking through his calm voice. I never forgot her. That photo, he pointed toward the frame. That's from the day I left the hospital. I insisted on taking one picture to remember the woman who taught me how to live again. Talia stared at the photograph. Her knees felt weak. She never told me any of that. She just said she worked long hours to make ends meet. She didn't want me to think she'd been around rich people. Richard sighed. She was proud, fiercely proud. She didn't want charity. Talia nodded slowly, her tears falling silently. Yeah, that sounds like her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Just the sound of the rain outside tapping softly against the tall windows. Richard looked at Talia, really looked at her, and saw Grace's spirit in every glance, every tear, every word. "You have her eyes," he said quietly. Talia managed a faint smile. "People say that." Then, almost whispering, she asked again, "Why did you keep her photo all these years?" Richard's gaze lingered on the frame. "Because some people remind you what it means to be alive. And when you find someone like that, you don't forget them, not even when the whole world changes." The clock struck midnight, and as the sound echoed through the mansion, Talia realized she hadn't just stumbled into a billionaire's house. She'd walked straight into the buried past of her mother's untold story. A week earlier, Talia Walker, a 19-year-old college student, was scrubbing coffee stains off a countertop inside a small cafe downtown. The place smelled of roasted beans and old dreams, the kind of cafe where people came to chase their ambitions, while Talia was just trying to survive hers. Her name tag was cracked, her apron faded, and her shoes had holes so small they only let in trouble when it rained. But her smile never wavered. She had learned early, you can't let life see you break. Every morning, she'd wake up in a cramped little room at the top of a noisy apartment building. The ceiling leaked when it stormed. The radiator made strange hissing sounds. And yet, every inch of that space carried pieces of her late mother, a framed photo, an old quilt, and a little box filled with letters Grace had written before she died. Grace Walker. The name still made Talia's chest tighten. She'd been more than a mother. She'd been Talia's entire world. She had passed away from a sudden illness when Talia was just 15. No warning, no time to prepare. One day, she was laughing in their kitchen, stirring soup on the stove, and the next she was gone. Since then, life had been an endless cycle of work, study, and exhaustion. Classes during the day, cafe shifts at night. Some days, she'd fall asleep on her textbooks, only to wake up before sunrise and rush back to work. Yet despite it all, there was still a quiet fire inside her, a belief that someday, things would get better. She didn't want pity. She wanted purpose. That afternoon, as Talia carried a tray of cappuccinos to a table near the window, her ears caught the chatter of two elegantly dressed women sitting nearby. They looked like they had stepped straight out of a fashion magazine. Pearls, perfume, and perfect hair. "I heard Mr. Caldwell himself will be there," one of them said, sipping her latte. "The Richard Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Industries." The other woman gasped. "Oh, the billionaire? The one who donates millions to orphanages." "Yes, and this time it's a charity gala for single mothers. He's launching some new foundation, something about empowering women and families." The words single mothers hit Talia like a quiet lightning bolt. Her hands froze mid-motion. Her heart began to race. Her mother had always talked about doing something for single moms, about how the world treated them like they were invisible. Every mother deserves to be seen, Talia, she used to say. People forget. Sometimes, love is the only wealth we have. Talia blinked, lost in memory for a moment, until one of the customers called out, "Miss? The bill, please." She snapped back to reality, nodding quickly. "Oh, sorry, right away." But as she walked back to the counter, her mind wasn't in the cafe anymore. It was somewhere else, at the mention of that name. Richard Caldwell. She didn't know why, but it sounded oddly familiar. Maybe her mother had mentioned it before? Maybe in one of those late-night stories about her time working as a nurse? But Grace had always been private about her past. She'd once told Talia, "Not all chapters need to be read aloud, sweetheart." That night, after her shift, Talia sat on her small bed, staring at the dim glow of her phone. She searched Richard Caldwell Charity Foundation. A glossy article appeared, a photo of a tall man with silver hair and kind, piercing eyes. The headline read, "Billionaire Richard Caldwell to host charity gala for single mothers at his private mansion." There it was again, that feeling. Something deep inside her chest stirred, not just curiosity, but a strange pull. She whispered to herself, "Mom, why does his name sound so familiar?" The next morning, she made up her mind. Between her college assignments and cafe shifts, she filled out a volunteer application online. The form was long, full of questions about her background, her motivations, her interest in philanthropy. Talia didn't have fancy words or a degree, but she had honesty. "Why do you want to volunteer?" she wrote. "Because I know what it feels like to be invisible, and I want to help people like my mom be seen." She hit submit and sighed, never expecting a reply. After all, rich people didn't usually notice girls like her. Days passed. Then one evening, as she was wiping down tables, her phone buzzed. "Congratulations, Ms. Walker. You've been accepted as a volunteer for the Caldwell Charity Gala this Saturday." She froze. "Wait, me?" Her coworker, Jenna, peeked over her shoulder. "Girl, you got invited to Caldwell Mansion? That place is unreal. You're going to see how billionaires live." Talia laughed nervously. "Yeah, if they don't kick me out first." That night, she could barely sleep. She ironed her only white blouse 3 times. Borrowed a black skirt from Jenna. Practiced her greeting in the mirror until sunrise. Behind her smile, though, was a quiet whisper. "Maybe this is a sign, Mom. Maybe something good is finally coming." Saturday arrived. The city sparkled with sunlight, and luxury cars lined the streets leading to the Caldwell estate. A mansion so massive it looked like something out of a dream. Marble columns, fountains, perfectly trimmed gardens. Every window gleamed like gold. Talia stood at the iron gates, clutching her volunteer badge. Her heart pounded, so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. She wasn't supposed to be here, at least. That's what the little voice in her head kept saying. But something inside her told her she was exactly where she needed to be. As she walked through the gates, surrounded by laughter and camera flashes, she whispered under her breath, "Mom, if you can see me right now, I hope you're proud." Inside, chandeliers glittered, waiters glided through the crowd, and soft classical music floated in the air. Talia couldn't help but feel small in her borrowed shoes and simple clothes. But she pushed the thought away. Her mother had always told her, "Kindness doesn't care what shoes you wear, baby. It just walks wherever it's needed." And as she stepped deeper into the mansion, she had no idea that one photograph on the wall would soon shatter everything she thought she knew about her mother's past and her own destiny. The day of the charity gala arrived, bright, clear, and dazzling. Luxury cars rolled through the iron gates of the Caldwell Mansion, their polished surfaces glinting in the afternoon sun. Photographers flashed cameras, guests mingled in elegant dresses and tuxedos, and the air smelled of money, champagne, and ambition. And in the middle of it all stood Talia Walker, trying not to get lost. She wore a plain white blouse, freshly ironed but fraying at the sleeves, and a black skirt she'd borrowed from her friend Jenna. Her shoes pinched slightly, but she didn't mind. Today wasn't about comfort. It was about belonging, or, at least, pretending to. "Volunteers, please head to the West Hall," a coordinator called out, clipboard in hand. "Guests will start arriving in 20 minutes." Talia nodded quickly, clutching her volunteer badge like it was a shield. Her stomach churned with nerves as she followed the other volunteers inside. The mansion was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls. The floors gleamed like mirrors. Every corner smelled faintly of roses and expensive polish. For someone who had grown up struggling to pay rent, this place felt like another planet. As she arranged brochures on a marble table, Talia couldn't help but glance around in awe. Guests were already beginning to filter in. Men in sleek suits, women in shimmering gowns that sparkled under the light. She smiled politely when spoken to, nodding and handing out flyers about the Caldwell Foundation for single mothers. That phrase still lingered in her mind. Single mothers. Her mother, Grace Walker, had been one, strong, proud, and endlessly loving. Talia wondered, just for a second, if her mom would have smiled knowing this foundation existed. She brushed the thought away and continued arranging the brochures. Then something caught her eye. Down a quiet corridor, away from the music and laughter, stood a long hallway filled with golden picture frames. The hallway was roped off, probably meant for private viewing, but her curiosity tugged harder than her caution. She glanced around. No one was watching. So, carefully, she stepped beyond the rope. The corridor was lined with photographs, grand portraits of Richard Caldwell shaking hands with world leaders, receiving awards, cutting ribbons at charity events. But the further she walked, the more the photos changed. They became older, more personal. Family portraits, a wedding photo, pictures of a younger Richard with his son. And then one picture stopped her cold. It didn't belong there. It wasn't framed in gold. It wasn't even high quality. It was an old, slightly faded photograph, tucked neatly between glossy frames like it didn't quite fit, yet somehow mattered more than all of them. In it, a young woman stood beside a hospital bed, smiling brightly. Her hand rested gently on the shoulder of a man in a hospital gown, a much younger Richard Caldwell. Talia froze. Her heart skipped a beat. That smile, that face. Her voice came out as a whisper. "Mom?" She stumbled closer, her trembling fingers brushing against the glass. The label beneath the frame read in elegant gold letters, "Grace W., my guardian angel." Her breath caught in her throat. Her knees went weak. It was her mother. The same brown eyes. The same warmth in her smile. The same nurse's uniform she used to wear when she worked at St. Mary's Hospital. But how? Why was her picture here, in a billionaire's mansion? Talia's mind spun in a whirlwind of questions and disbelief. She stared at the photo as memories of her mother's laughter, her late-night lullabies, and her gentle voice came flooding back. Tears welled in her eyes. She pressed her hand against the glass, whispering, "Mom, what were you doing here?" "Miss," a deep voice startled her. Talia turned around to see a tall security guard approaching. His expression was stern. "This area is off-limits to volunteers. Please step back." "Wait, please." Talia blurted, her voice trembling. "This photo, it's my mom. I need to know why it's here." The guard frowned. "Miss, I'll have to escort you." "No," she cried, desperation in her tone. "Please, let me talk to Mr. Caldwell. This picture, this woman, is my mother." The urgency in her voice made the guard hesitate. He looked at the photo, then back at her. Something in her eyes, raw, sincere, made him pause. "I'll inform Mr. Caldwell," he finally said, speaking into his earpiece. "We have a situation near the East Corridor." Talia stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. Moments later, the soft echo of approaching footsteps filled the hall. The air seemed to thicken. Every sound, the ticking clock, the faint chatter from the ballroom, faded as Richard Caldwell appeared at the end of the hallway. He was tall, composed, and carried the kind of presence that silenced a room. His silver hair gleamed under the chandelier's light. But when he noticed the young girl standing by that photo, the one photo he never expected anyone to recognize, his calm demeanor cracked. The guard gestured toward Talia. "Sir, she says she knows the woman in the picture." Richard's brow furrowed. "Knows her?" Talia turned to him, her voice trembling but determined. "Not knows. That's my mother." He blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" My mom's name was Grace Walker, Talia said, her breath quickening. She worked as a nurse years ago. And this, she pointed to the photo, this is her. I don't understand why her picture is hanging in your mansion. The words echoed down the marble corridor like thunder. For a second, neither of them moved. Richard's eyes flicked from the photo to the girl standing before him. The resemblance undeniable. The same expressive brown eyes. The same calm strength in her voice. His lips parted, but no words came out. Talia took a step closer. Why is her picture here? Who was she to you? The billionaire's face went pale. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the frame, his voice breaking the silence at last. Grace Walker, he whispered, almost afraid to say it aloud. That's not possible. He stared at the photograph. And suddenly, the years seemed to fall away. The gala music in the background faded to nothing. For Richard Caldwell, time had just rewound 20 years, to a hospital room, a nurse's smile, and a promise he had never forgotten. And for Talia Walker, the girl who came to volunteer out of curiosity, that single photo had just changed everything she thought she knew about her mother and her own life. Richard led Talia into his private study. The door shut behind them with a soft click, sealing them off from the laughter and music of the gala, still echoing faintly down the hall. The room smelled faintly of old books, cedarwood, and something else, memory. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined the walls, filled with trophies, framed articles, and photographs that charted a billionaire's rise to glory. But none of that mattered now. Not to Richard. Not to the young woman standing before him, trembling with unanswered questions. He turned toward her slowly, his usually steady hands shaking. His face, the same face that appeared on magazine covers and news reports, suddenly looked fragile, human. His eyes scanned Talia's face, studying every detail. The curve of her cheekbones, the small scar above her eyebrow, the familiar way she furrowed her brows when nervous. It was all there, Grace's reflection, standing before him in flesh and blood. He swallowed hard. You look just like her. Talia shifted uneasily. People say that. But you still haven't told me how you knew my mom. Richard took a shaky breath and walked to the window. Rain had started to drizzle outside, tapping gently against the glass. He spoke quietly, as though the words themselves carried weight. I met your mother a long time ago, he said. Almost 20 years back. I'd been in a terrible car accident. They said I was lucky to be alive, though back then I didn't feel lucky. He paused, his eyes distant. I was a miserable man, angry, arrogant. I had money, power, everything people dream of, but inside I was empty. My wife had left. My son barely spoke to me. The people around me cared about business, not me. And then, he turned, his voice softening. Then your mother walked into my hospital room. Talia's eyes glistened. She was your nurse? He nodded. Grace Walker. She came in with this calm, quiet energy, like she carried light into every room. I remember I barked at her the first day. A faint smile tugged at his lips, told her I didn't need her pity. She just looked at me and said, then it's a good thing I'm not offering any. Talia couldn't help but smile through her tears. That sounds like her. Richard chuckled softly. She had this way of humbling me without saying much. Every evening she'd check on me, not just my wounds, but my mood. When I refused hospital food, she started bringing homemade soup. Said hospital meals were good for healing the body, but soup heals the soul. He paused, lost in the memory. She'd sit by the window and talk about her little girl. You said you were smart, full of questions, that you loved to draw. She used to describe your laughter, said it was her favorite sound in the world. Talia's throat tightened. She told you about me? Every day, he said. She said, my Talia's going to change the world someday. She just doesn't know it yet. Talia's lips trembled. I never knew she talked about me to anyone at work. She always seemed so tired when she came home. I thought she didn't want to burden anyone. Richard sighed. Grace never saw herself as a burden. She saw hope in everyone else, but never in herself. He walked over to his desk and picked up a small wooden box. Inside was a folded note, yellowed with age. He opened it carefully and handed it to Talia. The paper was fragile, the handwriting neat and familiar. It read, "For Mr. Caldwell, don't lose your kindness. The world needs more people who listen with their hearts, not their wallets. Grace." Talia's tears fell freely now. She wrote this. Richard nodded. "The day she left the hospital, I found it on the table beside my bed. I tried to thank her, offered her money, a house, anything. But she refused. She said, 'Kindness isn't a transaction, Mr. Caldwell. Just pass it on someday.'" His voice broke as he repeated the words. That line, it's been in my head ever since. Every donation I made, every charity I started, it was all because of her. Because she reminded me that people matter more than profit. Talia looked down, the note trembling in her hands. "My mom never told me any of this," she whispered. "She never said she helped someone so important." "She didn't see me as important," Richard said gently. "And that's what made her so extraordinary." He turned away, his shoulders heavy. "I searched for her, you know. After I recovered, I wanted to thank her properly. But when I went back to the hospital, they told me she'd quit. Moved away. No forwarding address. I thought she'd started a new life somewhere." Talia's voice cracked. "She didn't. She got sick. Cancer. She never told anyone until it was too late. She said she didn't want pity." Richard closed his eyes, guilt flooding his face. "If I'd found her sooner, if I'd known," his voice trailed off. He sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands. "All these years, I thought she was out there somewhere, happy, living her life. But she was suffering, and I wasn't there." Talia hesitated, then slowly walked closer. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the soft sound of rain filled the silence between them. Finally, she said quietly, "You couldn't have known." He looked up at her, eyes red. "But I should have tried harder." She shook her head gently. "My mom never blamed anyone. She believed people meet for a reason, even if it's just to remind each other what goodness looks like." Richard smiled faintly through his tears. "That sounds like something she'd say." He turned back to the photo on his desk, a smaller copy of the same one from a hallway. Grace's smile looked timeless, untouched by years. "I kept this photo to remind me of her," he said softly. "Of the woman who saved my life, not just my body, but my soul. She taught me that wealth means nothing if your heart is poor." Talia wiped her eyes. "She would have been happy to know you remembered her." Richard looked at her, really looked, and for a moment it was as if he was seeing Grace again, standing there with her gentle smile and kind eyes. "Maybe," he whispered, "I never really lost her. Maybe she sent you back, so I could finally say thank you." The rain outside grew heavier, washing against the glass like the world itself was weeping with them. And for the first time in years, the billionaire felt something he hadn't felt since the day he met Grace Walker. Peace. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Only the soft hum of the city outside filled the silence. Car horns in the distance, raindrops against the window pane, and the faint ticking of a clock that seemed to count down every heartbeat in that room. Richard sat back, his hands trembling, eyes fixed on the young woman before him. He had built empires, signed billion-dollar contracts, and stood on world stages, yet somehow this moment, right here, felt heavier than all of it combined. He rose slowly and walked toward a glass cabinet behind his desk. Inside were mementos of his long, complicated life, awards, letters, framed memories of achievements that once seemed important. But there, tucked away in the corner behind an old photo frame, was a thin folder covered in dust. Richard stared at it for a long time before pulling it out. He brushed off the dust gently, as if it were something sacred. When he turned back toward Talia, his voice was quieter. "There's something I want to show you." He placed the file on the table and slid it toward her. The golden nameplate on the cover had faded, but it still read, "The Grace Walker Memorial Scholarship, established 2008. Talia blinked, confused. "Wait, that's my mom's name." Richard nodded slowly. "After she disappeared, I didn't know what else to do. I wanted to honor her somehow. So I created this scholarship fund for young women who remind me of her. Kind, determined, brave." But his voice wavered. "I never found anyone who truly fit. Until now." Her fingers brushed over the file, hesitant, as if afraid it would vanish if she touched it too hard. Are you saying this is for me? Richard's lips curved into a trembling smile. It's always been for you. I just didn't know it yet. She gasped softly, her voice breaking. But I don't deserve this. I'm just a waitress, a college dropout trying to survive. He raised his hand gently. Stop right there. Your mother once told me something I never forgot. A person's worth isn't measured by where they start, but by how they keep going. That's exactly what you've been doing, Talia. You've fought through loss, poverty, and pain, and yet you're still standing. That's the kind of strength money can't buy. Talia's eyes blurred with tears. I wanted to make her proud. I didn't think anyone noticed. Richard's eyes softened. She would be more than proud. She'd be in awe. He opened the file, showing her the documents inside, bank forms, letters from universities, legal approvals. I've kept this ready for years, he said quietly. Full tuition, living expenses, and a yearly stipend. You can study anywhere you want, medicine, law, art, whatever your heart tells you. This is your second chance, Talia. Maybe it's also mine. She stared at him, unable to find words. The tears she had been holding back finally spilled down her cheeks. Mr. Caldwell, I don't know what to say. Richard smiled faintly. You don't need to say anything. Just promise me one thing. When you're standing on your own 2 feet one day, help someone else the way your mother helped me. Pass it on. Talia nodded, her voice barely a whisper. I promise. Richard exhaled, his shoulders relaxing as if he had finally laid down a burden he'd carried for decades. For a long time, neither of them moved. They just sat there, two souls bound by the memory of a woman whose kindness still echoed through both their lives. Then, Richard's gaze drifted to the large portrait on the wall, the one of Grace smiling in her nurse's uniform, the one that had brought Talia here in the first place. He looked up at her photo and whispered, voice trembling, I finally kept my promise, Grace. I passed it on. The chandelier light above flickered softly, glinting across the glass frame as if in silent acknowledgement. Talia turned toward it too. The picture seemed almost alive in that moment, her mother's warm eyes watching over them both. The faintest smile on her face seemed to glow under the golden light, just like it had the night she first met Richard all those years ago in that hospital room. Richard stood and walked Talia to the front doors himself. The grand hall that once felt cold and lifeless now seemed different, warmer, lighter, as though something sacred had been restored. As they reached the door, Talia turned back to him. I don't know how to thank you, she said softly. You didn't have to do any of this. He shook his head. No, Talia. I did. Because your mother once taught me that real wealth isn't what you keep, it's what you give. Tonight, I finally understood what she meant. The rain outside had stopped. The air smelled fresh, clean, renewed, like the world itself had decided to start over. Talia stepped onto the marble porch and looked back one last time. Inside the mansion, she saw Richard standing beneath the chandelier, staring up at her mother's photo. His face looked peaceful, almost serene, the weight of guilt replaced by quiet gratitude. And there, under the soft glow of the golden lights, the photograph of Grace Walker gleamed, brighter than ever. Her smile, frozen in time, seemed to whisper through the hallways. You did good, Richard. Talia stood for a long moment, letting the sight sink in. For the first time in years, she didn't feel lost. She felt connected to her mother's legacy, to the kindness she had unknowingly left behind, and to the man whose heart her mother had once healed. As she walked down the mansion steps, her phone buzzed. A notification popped up, Caldwell Scholarship Award accepted. She laughed softly through her tears. You really did it, Mom, she whispered to the sky. The moonlight broke through the clouds, shining down on her like a gentle blessing. Back inside, Richard sat at his desk, staring at the photo one last time. For years, he had lived surrounded by luxury, but tonight he felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Not pride, not power, peace. He glanced up once more and murmured, I hope you're proud, Grace. And as the clock ticked softly in the background, the old billionaire smiled, not as the richest man in the city, but as the luckiest man alive. Because sometimes the greatest fortune isn't found in money, but in the chance to keep a promise and change a life. Years after Grace Walker's death, her kindness still changed a life. One act of compassion from a nurse healed a broken billionaire. And years later, her daughter became the living proof that kindness never dies. Sometimes, the smallest good deed echoes louder than a lifetime of wealth.